their well-being and empower them to thrive. And at DFSS, that's what we want all of our programs to do. As you know, maybe we have Children's Services Division, but we also have homeless services, emergency services, domestic violence services, senior services, some workforce development services. I think that's it. Here. Oh, and youth services. So welcome to the planning cycle for CEL's training agenda. This is sort of our agenda for the day. We're going to try to stay within these time limits. I think it's run a little bit shorter than 2.5 hours, less than 2 hours, so you should be able to get out and get to your car before your meter runs out. So after we do some introductions, we're going to introduce ourselves. I want you to introduce yourselves because it's all new. We'll do a overview of the planning cycle. We'll go over the community assessment, which isn't actually required for PFA/PI agencies, but we want to let you know that resource is available for you. The self-assessment, depending on where we're at, we'll take a little break. We'll talk about those roundtables and action plans, the goals and objectives, and then due dates and any Q&A. So let me just start with the introductions. My name is Beth Stover. I'm one of the assistant directors in Children's Services Division. I'm an assistant director of planning, surprise, and communication. I've been with the city for almost 12 years, I guess now. I used to be upstairs in the grants unit, so I was responsible for the Head Start and Early Head Start grant application at the time, and some of the other grants that the city does. So that's me. I want to introduce the team to you and some other folks from DFSS who are here in the room, so you've become more and more familiar over time with our faces. So Tasha?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Tasha Smith. I'm the supervisor. I work in the administration unit with City Children's Services Division, and I work on community assessment, self-assessment. I support the grant process, and I'm also over the CPPC, and I work with the CCDO.
Hi everyone, my name is Mike Turner. I'm a program development coordinator. I work in the planning and admin unit, and also work on the community assessment and other grant support.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Madeline Shea. I actually work in the grants unit here at DFSS, filling Beth's huge shoes in that role. Fairly new, but I work basically as the grants liaison to the Children's Services Division, so I work really closely with this team.
Mara Martinez, Program Development Coordinator in the Communications Team, under Beth.
Jamila Rashad, also with Children's Services Division on the Quality and Development Team. I'm a Program Development Coordinator as well.
Did I see Sophia walk in?
Yes. Hi. Sophia Williams, Program Development Coordinator for the Quality Team.
Hi, I'm Bernice Vargas. I work with Beth, Tasha, Mike, and I'm planning development coordinator as well, and work closely with self-assessment.
Last but not least,
Not least.
Glenn was on Director of Accounting here at DFSS. You may either met me at prior meetings or see my name.
So if you wouldn't mind, we'd like to also meet you because many of you are new to us, not maybe to Sophia and Camilla, but to us we are. So if you could introduce yourself and what agency you're with, that'd be great.
Eric Williams, I want to introduce you to daycare.
Great.
Lavelle Williams, learning tree preschool.
The Learning Tree Preschool is right here. Excellent.
Hi, Amy Kendall Lynch from the Maryville Crisis Nursery.
Nice to meet you.
Danielle Grivett from Maryville Academy, working with the Maryville Crisis Nursery.
You know, you can't, by the way, don't test me afterwards. I'm not going to do this all, but it's a start.
Sherry Sims, Options for You program.
Keita Murphy, Options for You Prevention Initiative Home Visiting Program.
Okay.
Yes. Jordan Price, bookkeeper for Options for
Good. Glenn likes to hear that, right?
Nelda Jones, Stepping Stone Village, Alethea Travis with Happy Holidays.
Oh, hi.
Colorado.
Some people like I ended up talking to on the phone before.
Hi, Sarah Loftman with Captain Charities.
Hi. Oh, Jamila, we already did.
Zelda from Fairyland Mentor Center.
Oh, great, great.
Carrie Cross Gadsden.
Oh, hi.
Andrella Lee from Lee's Cottage and Care.
Okay, great.
Charlotte Mack from Teddy Bear Daycare.
Teddy Bear Daycare? Great.
Ann Walker, Youth Learning Center.
Okay, and
Roxanne Torres from Little Learners. Joy Avila from Kids Colony.
okay, I know that name.
Marina Lopez from Kitty Care.
Kitty Care?
Azucena Palomar from Little Takes Two.
Wait, that was really quick. What did you say?
Azucena Palomar, Little Takes Two.
Little Tykes too? Great.
Nina Rudolph Davis, Chicago Youth Centers. Letitia Parker, Chicago Child Care Society.
Okay.
Miriam Cruzet from Passenger Services.
From Passages?
Martina Fox.
Salvation Army? Great.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Malikatich from One Hope United.
One Hope United?
Kathy Dorsey, Dorsey's Development Institute.
Allison Brenson from Asian Human Services.
Great.
Karen Suarez with SGA.
Eddie Diaz with SBA.
Great, I'm so glad. SGA is coming every day. Good.
So if there's a True Life Foundation.
Branch online, what's True Life Foundation?
Linda Alexander,
The True to Life Foundation. That's right here.
Adrian Regan from Misha X.
Laura?
Jason Shonsky from the State of Illinois Child Development Center.
Great.
Hi, Tasha Johnson, Catholic Charities.
Hi.
Sarah Spraker at Concordia Place.
Concordia.
Laura Cousins, Mark City.
Oh, okay.
Jim Ramsey, Architect.
Oh, hi, okay. Okay, great, great. And somebody, do we have some spots for everybody? Are we good? Somebody just came in. Not to put you on the spot or anything. Where did, what agency are you with?
Chicago Youth Centers, Pathway for Learning.
Great, great,
I'm Heidi, I'm from Teddy Bear Daycare Centers.
great, great. Do we have any more? We got seats. Great. So thank you everybody for going through that, what seems like a long exercise, and I won't remember your names, all of you, some of you I will, but you know, over time it builds up that familiarity and it really helps. All right, so, you know, one of the things that we've been trying to do with the Chicago Early Learning and with the consolidation is kind of merge some of our processes. And so some of the information we're going to give you is it's the planning cycle. The planning cycle, of course, is relevant for any agency or program. It doesn't matter if you're early childhood or if you're something else. Some of the activities we're going to discuss, there's really only a requirement because Head Start performance standards require it of Head Start funded agencies. So if you're not receiving Head Start funding, you don't have to worry about it. But we want you to know what's available because we'll issue a division-wide or system-wide report that you'll be able to access to help you with your work at your agency.
So for the PI programs, because we do have to do our own assessment, do you all have guidance for us for that?
So funny you should say that, ask that. We're going to go over the community assessment, then we're going to go over the self-assessment, and we are going to be handing out guidance if you didn't already pick it up when you walked in. And we're going to go over the instructions for that. If you didn't get the handout, Alia is now here. She's our supervisor of communication, making extra copies, so raise your hand and she'll bring them around.
No, I just wanted to ask that if you could repeat the question, if there's some music
Oh,
playing
just
next
because,
door and-
you know, senior services, that's the senior center,
I didn't
sorry.
hear the question.
We didn't know they were gonna have a party. Usually, like, we can smell their lunch too, so that's kind of nice. That's not every day. We're gonna go over the community assessment, which is only required of Head Start agencies. And so what she asked is, are we gonna share instructions for the self-assessment? Indeed we are. We're gonna go over the self-assessment. We're gonna talk about roundtables, monitoring roundtables that take place that everybody will participate in. And then we're gonna go over program goals and objectives that are gonna be required of every program. And then we'll have some Q&A, and of course Q&A along the way. And let me also put as a disclaimer, we're going to be sending out tonight in the CSD update, the PowerPoint, as well as copies of all the instructions. And if you don't get CSD updates, you should talk to Mara. Remember her in the magenta dress? And she will take down your email, and we will put you on the distribution list, okay? All right, next slide. So when you look in your cells, this is what the planning cycle chart looks like. And I think the main thing to keep in mind is that typically everything that we ask a community-based organization, a CBO, to do, we have to do a system-wide, or sometimes we say grantee-wide version of it. So if we ask you to do a self-assessment, guess what? We're doing a self-assessment too. Now, this wasn't the best visual representation of the planning cycle, not least because it's a square and a cycle is circular. So we'll go to the next slide with my somewhat chicken scratch version of the planning cycle. Where do we start? We start with what the community needs that we're serving, right? All of this is, oh, there goes my, all of this should be, you should be familiar with most of this because you've all been programming for a long time, I'm sure. And so it's just sort of a refresher and kind of making explicit a lot of things that you already know. You have what your community needs, right? And then you have research and best practices. How do we best serve young children? What do we know about? What does the research tell us about serving young children, about brain development, about relationships between caregivers and young children alike? And then you have, because you're getting money from somewhere, some sort of performance standards, usually from your funders, that you have to follow. Hopefully, those standards are aligned with best practices, are aligned with what your community needs, right? So you start with that, and from there, you have a program, right? That has goals and objectives, something you want to accomplish for the population you're serving. You have measures for success. Periodically, you assess how well you're doing. That's the self-assessment. And out of that, when you figure out how well you're doing or where you need to improve, you come up with an action plan to help you with that process. Or sometimes you come back and you revise these goals and objectives because you found out that something happened and they need to be revised. So we're going to walk through each of these steps. The community needs. Who is the population? Where do they live? What do they need to support their children? And the like. Those are those kind of questions. Research best practices. Child development research, right? Pedagogical practices. Sometimes we have best practices or research about fiscal and administrative practices and other sorts of practices as well, right? That's when like the feds or the state comes up with a new like circular about how you should be reporting cost allocation or indirect costs or something like that. And then lastly, you have your funders standards, which might be ISB administrative rules, or for those of you who have Head Start performance standards. And for what's new this year, the CELS, the Chicago Early Learning Standards, which are sort of an amalgamation of the two. You have to think of all those things when you set up your early childhood program and you make decisions, right, about what kind of curricula does your community and the population you serve need. What are the program models you should be providing? What options? Are you going to do prevention initiative home visiting? Or are you going to do center-based, right? Those are some of the things that you want to think about. Depending on what kind of program and what your funder allows, you might be making some determinations about how many hours a day should we be doing? Where should the program be located? What kind of other services do those children and families need, right? And then you set up with that program goals and objectives. What are you trying to accomplish with your program, and how can you tell if you're successful? I think that we're all doing this in one way or another with our programs, right? We do it with so many aspects of our lives, and our programs are no different. So then we assess, self-assessment. How well do we do what we say we're doing? How well are we meeting the community needs? How well are we following best practices? How well are we following program standards? Essentially, how well are we serving the children and families we're serving with our program, right? Next. So monitoring actually asks the same questions. If the self-assessment is an internal sort of monitoring, right? When our monitoring teams come out, it's like an external monitoring. But your external monitors should be asking the same questions. How well does the program do what it says it's doing? How well does it meet the community needs? How well does it follow best practices? How well does it follow program standards? And what do you look at to be able to tell, right? Data, customer feedback. Maybe you're surveying your parents, maybe you're just talking to your parents because they come in every afternoon to pick up their kids and they tell you about what's going on, right? Monitoring reports from your funder, and reflective practices, right? Thinking about what's going on, kind of intuitively thinking about things and trying to make that intuitive knowledge explicit. So the co-assessment is the roundtable. So when we talk about monitoring roundtables at CSD, we're talking about a opportunity for the program and your monitoring team to come together and to share the self-assessment and their monitoring reports and talk about how things are going. That's what the roundtable is.
Is there going to be like a written guidance as to how those roundtables will be conducted, so and that'll be sent out?
Yeah, well, when it gets closer to the time, there'll be a lot more details provided by the program operations team about that. So here we are, back in our visualization where you've got the monitoring roundtable, you're looking at the self-assessments, monitoring reports, data reports, goals and objectives. Next slide. So out of the assessment piece, out of that monitoring roundtable that you have, two things might happen. You might have an action plan. An action plan, well, everybody's going to have an action plan, which is areas for improvement to better meet current goals, objectives, and priorities. So action plans are like annual thing, right? They're not a short-term correction, right? But they're also not like changing your whole program goals or something like that, right? They're just like improving, we could be stronger in this area, right? So like our action plan at DFSS, we're trying to strengthen our mental health services. Tasha's going to talk a little bit more about that when we get there. It may be that you look and you find out that things have changed in your community, or there's been new research about how to best serve children, or all of a sudden now you got to follow the cells. And so you have to make adjustments with your program goals and objectives based on there's a misalignment going on that needs to be realigned. That somehow these need to be realigned with new information here, right? And that would result in revised goals and objectives. So that kind of encapsulates that program. So and then what happens? So with the planning cycle, the action plan, it circles back into feeding into your program. The revised, if you have revised goals and objectives, it comes back in here. And then for Head Start agencies, they're going to submit their action plan with their grant application. These do every year. How PFA, PI programs are going to submit their action plan. Right now we have a special email address that we're going to give you later where you'll submit them at the time, because we don't have a grant application process for you yet, completely honest. We're trying to figure out what the state wants us to do and what CPS wants us to do.
Do we know if we are going to be doing an application this coming up year?
Not this year. I can tell you this. You'll probably do one next year. You won't do one this year.
So let's just be clear. My agency has some Head Start children.
Yes, so
I work with Henry Booth House.
Yes.
So will they do this, and then I will give them information?
That's exactly right. She said her agency works with one of our Head Start, Early Head Start delegate agencies, right? The Head Start, Early Head Start delegate, and I think that this is going to become clearer and clearer as we work through the PowerPoint. The Head Start, Early Head Start delegate agency is responsible for some of these pieces. So if you have a relationship with one of them, you may not be responsible for doing all the pieces, right? But there are pieces that are required of everybody for the self-assessment. So as we go, that'll be kind of clarified a little bit. So let's start. We want to give you some information about the community assessment that we do and that we ask our agencies, our Head Start and Early Head Start agencies to do, right? Michael is going to go and take you through kind of what's available and what you might be able to use if you want to for the community assessment.
Okay, so the community assessment. So why do we need a community assessment? So DFSS will use the community assessment in the creation of goals and practices to deliver quality services to the children and families of the community. Each DFS agency will collect and analyze available qualitative and quantitative data to assess the needs and strengths of each community in its service area, such as informing on slot allocations, distribution, self-assessment, goals and objectives, and grant applications. So agencies must conduct a full community assessment at least once every 5 years and annually review and update the community assessment data to reflect significant changes, but however, like we mentioned, DFA PI is not required this time around. So here we have a visual representation of the community assessment process. Basically, this is how you might want to set up your community assessment if you were doing one. So step one is to plan and organize. And to plan and organize, you want to make plans and organize multiple tasks to ensure that you end up with quality information and useful reporting, such as creating the community assessment team, organizing the process, creating and planning a calendar, and a timeline. Step two, designing the work, also known as designing data collection. You may want to decide what types of data you want to collect, what kinds of data needs are needed for the community assessment, internal and external sources of data, developing questions to ask, types of resources for quantitative and qualitative data, and visual representations of data or how you want to display it. For step three, we gather data. So you don't necessarily want to gather too much of nothing. So you want it to be relevant so that it reflects and so you can reflect and administer the proper changes to your program to better serve your community. This is essentially one of the most important steps of the process, since the data you collect informs your entire review process as an organization. So step four, we have review and analyze the data. So data analysis is aimed at discovering what the data has to say. It's the process for obtaining results from the data you have collected. The mission is to serve the greatest number of eligible families and those who are greatest in need of its services. And finally, we have step five, or write the community assessment report with results and recommendations. So now you're basically ready to collect and pull together the data you've analyzed and turn it into certain recommendations. The results may impact your staff, procedures, parents, child care partners, social service agencies, and other community organizations. You may want to ensure that all of your results and recommendations tie back and flow logically from the data that was collected and reported. The community assessment then links to your goals and objectives, strategic planning, that is then approved by your governing body, and ultimately falls into your grant application. So, some of the minimum requirements for agency and community assessment reports and annual updates include for the introduction. So for each service area, we want you to complete the following using the community assessment tool, the Young Children in Chicago website, the Early Childhood Supply and Demand, or ECSD. We're asking for the background and mission of their organization and a map of your service area. So keep in mind that the data you will be collecting will provide evidence and demonstrate that your program serves the area of greatest need. This is also for justifying your program model and ensuring that it fits the needs of eligible children and families in your service area. All right, so for 2A, we want to provide the following data points. You can create a table for your convenience. So we have the estimated number of eligible infants, toddlers, preschool-age children, and expectant mothers by area, race, and ethnicities, and languages spoken by children and families. Basically, in the parentheses, I kind of sourced out where you would find this in those websites to aid for your grant applications, but as we said earlier, this is not going to apply to any PFA API. And then we have the following service area, or the following data points as well. All right. So for 2B, we have community needs and strengths in the following data. For 2C, we have community early child supply and demand. And we also wanted to include other child development child care centers, family child care programs, home visiting programs, and publicly funded preschool programs. So for 3A, we asked for a justification of proposed service area and program options. So we have the number of children served by your agency by age and by program model option. And we want to use the data above as well, like we said earlier, to demonstrate that your program serves the area of greatest need. And of course, a justification, which would include a narrative and a few paragraphs. So the key community assessment takeaways. So the community assessment is done every 5 years. There's an annual review and update required. We collect data to assess the community needs, use data to create program goals, structure, and best practices, and this is also found in the cells in the URCIA section of the manual on 114 and 115. One thing I wanted to mention before we continue on is that if you were submitting your community assessment. The template that we just went through directly aligns with your grant application Part B, but that's something we can talk about in the future. Okay, so here are some of the websites for the community assessment. Basically, I'll show you how the CNAT works so you can get more familiarized with it, so you can explore your community. And we'll do that right now. So this is the Chicago Needs Assessment Tool. This is a tool that's fairly new that we always try to update with the most current data that we have. But I'll show you kind of how it works. So for example, you can use these tools at the top so you can jump to a specific community area at first. So for example, I don't know, let's maybe do Englewood. So we do Englewood, and you can use these pluses and minuses to increase or decrease your viewability. You would then, for example, draw your community area. So for example, you would use this tool at the bottom to connect this data point here on the map to this one. Let's say maybe somewhere over here, all over here, and back. So now we have drawn our community area, so we want to run the program. So it's basically pulling data from the square that I drew for a specific community. And on the right side, we have the indicators that come out. So we have the measure, the reliability indicator, so basically that's saying how reliable is that data for the community area that I just drew. The estimated number, depending on the data point, and the percent. So I'll scroll down through this so everyone can see kind of how this data works out.
Right, so you're not required to do the community assessment, but this tool might be something that's really helpful for you to figure out who's in your service area and what kind of, so if you can see some of these measures are, they're from the American Community Survey, and they're aggregated according to where you draw, and they can tell you a lot about those families in your immediate vicinity.
And we're also implementing a print function for the data in the map that will allow you to attach it to community assessment documents. So we'll inform each agency once this function is also available. So as you can see here, the reliability indicator, green is good, basically. The gray means that it's kind of
Unavailable.
What's that?
Unavailable.
Unavailable, correct, yeah. Yellow is kind of in between, and luckily there's no red.
Right, the larger the area is, the less likely you are to get red.
Right.
Because it's by track.
Correct.
So sometimes if you're in a really small, like 4-block radius, and it's something like pregnant teens, there just isn't enough data to come up with a good margin of error.
So all those links are attached also in the PowerPoint, so you'll be able to access them in the Chicago Needs Assessment tool. All right, so let's continue on. Okay, so for our granted level community assessment, so currently we're working on our 5-year quinquennial community assessment. The community assessment will be released February 2019. There are 4 major components to the QQCA. The quantitative data that I want to mention that the quantitative data that we collect is also received in partnership with Chapin Hall from the University of Chicago. Some of the data points that they process are from the American Community Survey administered by the U.S. Census Bureau. And then those data tables are then uploaded into the 3 websites as we previously discussed. So we have population and demographics. So for this one we have child population, languages spoken, poverty levels, and things like that. We have early childhood supply and demand. So all these indicators here, including the number of eligible children for Head Start, Early Head Start, PFA, PI, and child care, the number of slots available for programs, and some of the following data points. So, quite a bit of data. And health and well-being. such as healthcare access, birth data, health data, child abuse and neglect rates, and education data. So, in addition, we are conducting agency survey and focus groups. So DFSS is surveying its agencies and site leadership to identify key issues affecting the communities served by Chicago Early Learning programs. The goal of the survey for agencies and their site leadership is to identify key issues affecting the communities served by Chicago Early Learning programs. The responses of agency participants will help frame the community assessment and reveal certain trends that may not be captured using quantitative data sources. Each site will receive a request to complete the survey in the next, I think probably by tomorrow or so. So please check your inboxes for the survey, and I encourage everyone to take the survey as well. All right, so in addition to that, we'll be conducting parent survey and focus groups. So the parent survey and focus groups basically identify key concerns regarding their children, community, and their expectations of early learning programs they are enrolled in. The surveys will be informed by preliminary analysis of quantitative data and the results of community agency survey and focus groups. So, and depending, of course, on the robustness of these surveys, we may conduct 1 or 2 parent focus groups to get a better understanding of their concerns, needs, and strengths. So we'll be sending out additional information about this piece in the near future. Yes?
So, does that mean that you'll actually, will you all be conducting these, or will you be asking us to conduct these with our participants?
So we'll be asking parents to contribute to our focus groups as well.
Will PI programs be included in that, or are you just dealing with the data?
Yes, definitely. PI programs will be included. And everyone should receive the survey as well. Okay, so the Early Learning Interagency Task Force. So DFSS is also working collaboratively with sister agencies through the Early Learning Interagency Task Force, or ELIT, to identify community needs, cross-program service gaps, and opportunities to collaborate in serving Chicago children and families. So besides DFSS, the agencies that are participating are the Chicago Departments of Public Health, Cultural Affairs, Special Events, Planning and Development, Chicago Housing Authority, Public Library, Public Schools, Park District, Police Department, City Colleges, and the Office of Budget Management. So we're trying to get a very robust data set that can contribute not only to DFSS practices, but everybody else's that we would share. This is my contact information if you have questions about the community assessment. Are there any questions as of now about the community assessment from anyone?
Everybody understands that if you're a PFA, PI agency, you are not required to do a community assessment.
But our participants are going to be asked to participate in your focus groups
They
and that
may.
sort of thing.
So what we'll do is when we're getting ready to do parent focus groups, we'll be reaching out to agencies and we'll be organizing it that way.
And of course, we'll analyze and share the results of everything. So you'll be very aware of what's going on.
Everybody's going to get the agency survey, so you can tell us about your community that you're serving.
PI programs actually can hurt people all over.
That's right.
So, do you want to talk about the primary communities where the
You'll see when you see the
concentration is, or-
survey, it'll be kind of apparent to fill it out.
And if you have questions when you get it.
If you have questions, you can call me.
Okay, all right, thank you everyone. So now Tasha Smith is going to explain the self-assessment process.
Can we go back to that slide one?
Oh, sure.
Take a
Please, or take a picture.
Yes, the PowerPoint will be sent out. Can be sent out tonight. Through the CSD update, like I said, if you don't get CSD updates,
A clipboard is being passed around right now.
perfect. You can sign up on the clipboard.
Okay, before I begin, I just want to check see who needs additional handouts. You should have received 3 different handouts at the front table. Does everyone have 3 different handouts? Now, 1 on community assessment and 2 on the self-assessment. Okay, so Mara's going to be walking around, passing those handouts out. You can just leave your handouts so that she can see who she needs to get to. Okay, so we're going to start with the self-assessment. So once you have done your community assessment, it leads into your self-assessment process. This slide just illustrates what a self-assessment is. It's a process for reviewing progress on goals, and objectives, being accountable for what you propose in your application, and determining if resources are used effectively. Why do we have a self-assessment? We leverage our strengths and look for areas of improvement and innovation. Who participates in our self-assessment? Various program staff. Include your parents. If you have a parent committee at your center, include those parents, your governing body, or your leadership staff. Any outside of the program community leaders, any content experts within your organization, bring those staff persons in. And any other interested people. You want to have a diverse group on your self-assessment committee so that you can just garner all those different perspectives. Self-assessment is done annually. So every year we're going to ask you to complete your self-assessment. And while the self-assessment is required annually, it can be an overwhelming process. So we've broken it down into 5 phases that you can follow to help follow along. But before we go there, we want to talk about the benefits of self-assessment. First, self-assessment helps you see the big picture. It brings a fresh perspective. It helps you understand possibilities and challenges that the program faces, cultivate new ideas, and you build strong community partnerships, and you maximize use of your existing resources. The phases of the self-assessment are listed above. Before you begin the process, though, you're going to have a pre-self-assessment phase. That's where you're gearing up. You know what's coming up for you to complete, so you want to gather all your information and all your leadership around the table. The director and the management team will sit down to provide a loose framework of how your self-assessment plan should look. They also may want to prioritize areas for investigation. Were there any challenges last year or the current year that may present itself that you may need to focus on? You want to gather your preliminary data and create summaries of the data related to the areas of focus. Do you have any databases at your center? How are you collecting information on your parents? Are you using Excel or using COPA to look at those health requirements for your children? Is everyone in compliance? Are the systems there? But before you do that, you want to look at your self-assessment committee and establish a team lead. So for that team lead, you want someone that will be available to assist team members as they review the data. You want to use a strength-based process and encourage dialogue about the information you're collecting. You want to build a team consensus around recommendations. That person is also should be required to prepare a summary recommendation report to be shared with the full assessment team. So what would your findings? In phase 1, design the process. Again, you want to identify and invite internal and external team members. Don't forget about your parents, they're a wealth of knowledge. And you also want to consult with your agency leadership and your parent committee on the self-assessment plan. Phase 2, engage the team. It's very important to start with your strengths. That team lead also wants to guide the process and not control it. You want to include all of your team members for everyone's input, and perhaps use some multiple strategies to engage all team members. Maybe have some flexible meeting times, flexible meeting locations. Use conference calls for those who can't make it into the meetings. Keep the dialogue flowing and focus on the big picture versus results. For the self-assessment, we're focusing on a systemic issue that you may find in your center, not the non-compliances. So if you have children in your center with expired physicals, those are non-compliances. But if everyone has an expired physical, it's a systemic issue. For your self-assessment committee team members, best practices, these are some ideas that you should share with your committee members before you perform your self-assessment. You want them to remain open-minded and strength-based. You want them to analyze the data, engage in dialogue. Remember, you value the opinions of all team members, and to bring the voice of colleagues and peers to the table to share unique perspectives. So what you see here is an example of Children's Services Division Self-Assessment Committee and the responsibilities that we've asked of our team members to manage throughout the process. Some of them are meeting quarterly during the year and weekly during the self-assessment, identifying program trends and making recommendations for priority program ideas, and helping us draft an action plan that we need to focus on a particular goal for the upcoming year. Phase 3 is what should take the most time of your self-assessment process. Here you're looking at that data that you're collecting. Remember, you're focusing on systemic issues. You're going to review and analyze data and seek additional data as needed. Remember to keep that dialogue flowing both ways. You want to examine progress on your previous goals and objectives and current year, and formulate your discoveries or your findings. Get together and have a discussion. Here are 3 different data analysis techniques that you can also use. For those bigger programs, you want to first disaggregate that data. You want to break it down. Look at it classroom by classroom, center by center, to see if you see any patterns or trends coming up. You want to look at your data over time, year to year. So last year at this time, where were we? What were we doing? And examining multiple sources of data. Pull different reports to see what it will show you. Maybe it's something that's being skewed in one report that you can find in another. And the questions you want to ask yourself when you're looking at all of this data. What do we know? What patterns and trends do we notice when we compare year to year? What questions do we pose, and so forth? So here's an example of Children's Services Division self-assessment timeline that we're using here to do our self-assessment process. The section in pink is where we're conducting our self-assessment process. And we've broken down all of the topic areas between April 11th through May 30th. So each week we're going to get together, we're going to pull the data from each of those topic areas, looking at monitoring reports, different program information to see where we are. And we're going to come together as a group and discuss each finding. On our committee, we have representation from delegate agencies, from Head Start programs, Vision Initiative, Preschool for All, and so on. Parents are also included on our self-assessment committee so that we're making sure that we're including everyone in the discussion. The dates in white represent where we review our action plan updates. So we're looking at our goals and objectives and seeing where we are. Are we on track? Do we need to make some deviations to our plan? What's going on right now in current day? Phase 4, you want to recommend. You want to consolidate your findings across your teams. You want to get together and prepare recommendations which will inform your program planning for next year. You want to prioritize findings for your action plan goals. Which items do you want to focus on for that upcoming year? And you want to provide feedback on the self-assessment process for next year. So for this current year self-assessment process, what could we have done differently to streamline the process? Who could we have included that was not around the table that would have given us some more information or different perspective? Phase 5, prepare your report. So you want to aggregate everything you found into your report, and you want to share with your parents. Your Head Start, parent committees, and policy councils are required for review and approval. And so as you see the phases that we've been through, CSD will also follow the same process. So we're mimicking each other for the process as far as conducting our self-assessment. And the post-self-assessment phase, we review feedback to help plan for the next year. We do self-assessment report recommendations to confirm and revise program goals and objectives. We communicate the self-assessment insights to staff and other stakeholders. So I'm going to reference the handouts that were given to you. I'm going to focus on the 2 handouts that have the self-assessment narrative on it. One should be the tool that looks like this page, and the next is a narrative. Does everybody have a copy of those handouts? So all Chicago early learning programs must complete the self-assessment. That's if you're a PFA, PI only program, if you're a Head Start program, early Head Start program, everyone must complete the self-assessment. So the self-assessment was developed to be flexible and effective and inclusive of all program options. And because we will have a federal audit this year, so we will be audited by the Head Start federal office, we decided to mimic the federal audit with our self-assessment tool. We do understand that PFA and PI are not required to meet all of those Head Start requirements. So the tools that you'll be looking at will be an abbreviated version for PFA and PI. And throughout the tool, it'll let you know which performance measures PFA and PI are required to complete. So the tool is divided into 6 areas, and I'm on this page with the name. Program design and management, education, health, family and community engagement services, fiscal, and OSEA. When you're conducting your self-assessment, you want to include interviews, you want to look at your files, you want to go into your classrooms and do classroom observations, just to make sure that you know what's going on in your centers.
I'm a little confused about the self-assessment tool because the CELS is pretty clear that self-assessment tools are NAEYC accreditation, the environmental rating scales, the PASS. So how does this fit in? Is this additionally, or what am I misunderstanding? I'm misunderstanding something.
Well, you can use those resources to help you complete your self-assessment. But for the PFA programs, it's 14 performance areas. And so the areas that we have identified in our tool are things like health requirements. So all children in Illinois who attend a licensed daycare need an up-to-date physical. So the performance measures are general that don't really talk to Head Start or PFA or PI. It speaks to all early learning programs. So they are vague performance measures that you can go through and easily kind of rate yourselves on that particular performance measure. So for the education piece, are you using the appropriate curriculum? In the CELS, it says everyone must use creative curriculum. So are you using creative curriculum? And then you rate yourself. So they're vague enough to include the differences in the programs, but it's inclusive enough that everyone can complete the tool.
Okay. So the tools that are listed in the CELS, in the self-assessment section, do we have to submit those to DFSS or
The
no?
only thing
it's just this.
Right. The only thing you're going to submit is the narrative and the tool. For PFA, PI only programs, the narrative and the tool. If you're a Head Start delegate agency with PFA and PI partners, it's one self-assessment per delegate agency. We're not breaking it out for PFA and PI programs. As an agency, all of your programs should feed into one self-assessment. And you would then average your ratings across all of your programs, and you would put it here in the tool. Then you would submit your tool to us, and the narrative, if you have any systemic issues that would rate about a 4 or a 5, we're asking you to go into detail about those systemic issues and let us know what those are and what's your plan to address them.
So when you're talking about this tool, is this it's a rating tool? So you're checking off like 1 if you're excellent is a 1 and poor is a 5?
Yes.
Is that how?
So on page 4, if you can flip to page 4. Page 4 is health program services. Performance measures you see in the second column. The bolded print is where you will see which programs complete which performance measure. First one is all programs. Even though in the first box it talks about mental health and oral health nutritional needs, we know that PFA is not held to those requirements. However, if you look in your sales standards, pages 56 to 79, you can reference those pages and see what is applicable to your program. You are rating yourself against that. And so you can use PASS, ITERS, your NAEYC accreditation information, but we're just asking you, based on what we have given out, and as to be inclusive of all Chicago early learning programs and our standards that we set, where are you meeting for this particular measure? Yes.
So if we have multiple sites and multiple communities, one is average to all one.
Yes. Yes. Delegate agencies who have PFA, PI partners will submit one self-assessment for all of your programs. you're a PFA, PI only, for instance, charter schools, Learn, Legacy, it's one self-assessment, one narrative. Even if you have more than one classroom or more than one location, it's one per agency.
Where are the sales centers, the Chicago Learning Centers?
Let's work our way through the presentation and let's see if some of these questions get answered and then let's clarify, okay?
I think there's
So-
a well, or else I'm not understanding.
So
This entire thing.
let's work our way through the presentation
I'll
and
get
then
to it.
we'll
So as you go through the tools, let's go through the health program services again on page 4. This is the first box. The program effectively collects, tracks, addresses, and shares information regarding each child's health status and health needs, including health, mental health, oral health, and nutritional needs. If I am a PFA, PI program, even if I'm partnered with a Head Start agency, I'm still PFA. I can't do the mental health, the oral health, nutritional needs piece. I know that. I'm not required to do that. So where it says HSPPS, that's Head Start Program Performance Standards. Head Start programs will reference those standards along with sales 56 through 79. If I'm a PFA, PI only program, I go straight to my sales. I look on pages 56 through 79 to see what applies to me. The data sources in your narrative on page 2, it gives you a list of data sources that you can use that you have at your centers. If you have other information at your site that's not on here, feel free to use those. We're just looking to see, do all of your children have current physicals? Where's the data? It's on the back of the narrative for the instructions. At the bottom of your tool on each page, it says Performance Measure Rating Scale. At the bottom is a scale from 1 to 5. I'm looking at that top performance measure. Do I always effectively collect, track, and address and share information regarding child health status? Head Start would address all of this. Do I always do it? Almost always. Sometimes, sporadically could be improved, or almost never. It's not an exact science to say, okay, well, I had 15 children. It's up to your discretion. Remember, we're rating the system, not the non-compliances. So if you have a system in place that will track visits, immunizations, required screenings, is that system always working? Is it almost always working? Sometimes. So you have to look at your data. You have to pull your files to answer that performance measure. For the data sources, we're asking you to list what you use. If you use child files, put child files. If you use COPA reports, put COPA reports. Whatever you use. What we gave you in the narrative is just an example of the sources that you can use to complete the performance measure. And remember, if you are doing a self-assessment for multiple programs, it's an average. We're looking at the system of your agency, not each particular location separately. In sales, is broken down into our different topic areas. This is page 56 from sales. And at the top, it breaks down the different program models and options that we have. So for the health services programming chart, look to your left, and then you can look at the page, and the X's will indicate if you are held accountable to that particular standard. So that will also supplement going through the tool. I'm just looking to see, okay, do I have to do this? And it will tell you right there. For delegate agency partner sites only, they are required to complete the summary tool on page 11, along with the previous 9 or 10 pages. So not just this page, the entire tool. That says all programs. Remember, it says all programs. So you're looking at each box, and it will tell you who should complete which performance measure. And the information that we get from this is just going to help us build out that delegate agency partner framework that we've been working on. It is an action plan goal of CSD, so that's going to help us build out for our goals for the upcoming program year. Are there any questions regarding the tool?
So you're on page 3 of the narrative, and you have the number of PI number required performance area measures for health services, and then I'm jumping back over to the actual tool. It says all programs for 2.
Yes.
But you have 1 here.
Okay, that's probably a typo.
So that's what I just want to make sure, because those are the things that would make us crazy.
Yeah.
So that's 2. And then for fiscal infrastructure, it says 1 for PI, but all of these say Head Start, early Head Start.
Okay. So we're going to follow what's in the tool. You don't want to follow what's in the PowerPoint. The tool will guide you. So if you
I
go
should
through
not go by this chart then.
no, it seems like it wasn't a exact match. We apologize for that.
All right.
But the tool will guide you for what you need to do. This is your tool. And before we send the PowerPoint out, we will make corrections to the PowerPoint so that everything matches up. Thank you for putting that out.
At least 2. I haven't checked the other. I'm about to check those. It's a little thing, but it becomes, it means that we may not understand.
Right, I understand. It's a new process, so we'll take care of that. Yes.
So if we are one center, but we have PI home visiting, PI center based, and PFA, do we do 3 self-assessments? We average 1 self-assessment together.
You're going to average self-assessment together.
So all 3 different programs are lumped into 1 self-assessment.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Let me jump on this for a second. So when you're using your DC, or you're using your you're using your pickers, or you're using your this or your that, you're doing your self-assessment, you're conducting it. For the report that you submit to us, that kind of gives, if you look at that first page with that outline on it, kind of it's a narrative of the whole process. You're going to tell us, you're going to narrate your process. You're going to narrate your discoveries. You're going to slap on that completed tool, right? So it may be that you got some issue with this PI part of your program, but your PFA is going great. That's going to come out in that narrative. You're not going to submit a separate narrative and separate tool for each program. You're going to submit one, and it's going to cover everything with the acknowledgement that you have some strengths and you have some challenges, just like we do. We got some strengths and we have some challenges, right?
How long is the narrative?
Well, you need to fill it out. If we don't have a page, don't be too long.
We're following these questions, right? Give us an example. Let's say we rate ourselves for that health insurance, and we rated ourselves somehow. Whatever you want to do.
So for anything that you rate number 3, it's up to your discretion to put it as a systemic issue.
But I want to know what exactly, how the narrative looks. Whether it's 2 sentences based on this particular criteria, is it 5 sentences?
So what I would recommend is that we just handed you the instructions, right? We just handed you the template. Why don't you look at it and read it, and then if you need extra guidance about, well, how long do you want it to be? Do you want 3 paragraphs or whatever? Then ask it. I think it'll be clearer once you go through the process and you read the narrative and the outline more closely. I mean, essentially, if you have a challenge, a paragraph discussing that challenge. If you have a strength, a paragraph discussing that strength, right? Because as you'll see, that self-assessment is going to be what you bring with you to the round table to discuss your performance and your strengths and challenges with your monitoring team from CSD, right? So it's just a summary. It's a summary tool, right? It doesn't have to go on for pages and pages, but give us like a nice paragraph. Does that answer it?
No.
Okay, a paragraph.
Per each of these, or paragraph per your strengths and needs?
So let's go through again. Put the outline back up for you. Yeah. You describe your introduction. Briefly describe your program, mission and vision statement. What do you provide? What's your funded enrollment? What's the purpose of your self-assessment? Then you discuss the methodology you use. You give an overview description. Summarize it, right? It doesn't have to be for pages and pages and pages, right? Then key insights. Describe the strengths of your program, right? Describe the systemic issues, if you have any. Maybe you went through and there weren't any systemic issues. Maybe, your program's perfect or whatever. Discuss the progress of the program in meeting your goals and objectives. I don't think you all have those yet, so you won't have to respond to that unless you did. If you personally, as an agency, have some goals and objectives, feel free to discuss them. You haven't submitted any to us yet, so we're not holding you responsible for it yet, right? Let me just finish. And then recommendations. So one of the things that we put, I believe, Tasha, in the instructions is that if you mark a box 4 or 5, which is almost never or never, we expect that you are going to have a paragraph in the key insights discussing this is a challenge for us. Because if you say almost never or never, and it's a program requirement, then you should probably be thinking about what's going on and thinking about, what can we do to improve that area, right? You following me? All right. Yes?
So it's the 2016-17 goal, should it be 17-18?
So for the Head Start, Early Head Start agencies, they submitted fiscal year 17 goals and objectives, so they're assessing themselves on those goals and objectives. So that's Head Start. For you all, we're presuming we're not expecting you to talk about goals and objectives, but if you had them from last program year, right? From last program year, and now here you are mid-program year. Well, Tasha said this, how are we doing this program year at this time compared to last year at this time, right?
We were under the system
That's why I just said that you don't have program goals and objectives, but you will establish some going forward. That's where we're starting off with the self-assessment, because you've got a program.
It's a baseline.
Right, we're establishing a baseline. Thank you. That is a perfect way of saying it.
And for those of us who are new and don't have a baseline, we just say we're starting with where we are.
Well, you're starting with the cells, with the program standards, because those cells include the ISB administrative standards, right? So that's all we're asking you to assess them, right? And if you use NAEYC, if you use ITERS, if you use Vickers, because it's all been, a self-assessment has been required from ISB for PFA PI, use it. All we're saying is that please provide us with a summary and provide us with information in this tool, mostly so partially we can aggregate the information, right? If we have just narrative, we can't really aggregate very well. But if we've got 1 to 5, then we can say, oh, for our programs, everybody's a 5, everybody's a 1. This. And let me also say, our self-assessment committee, which has PFA, PI only agencies sitting on it, helped design the tool. They gave us input on the tool. So, we're hoping it works for everybody, but one thing we will do after the process is we will debrief, and we will take more recommendations, and if we need to make changes, we will going forward. So give it a try, all right? Try it out. Do your best.
If we're PFA and PI only, when it comes to rating performance measure that's Head Start, Early Head Start only, can we put not applicable? Because putting almost never kind of skews it.
So any performance measure that says Head Start, Early Head Start only, you don't have to do. Don't respond to those.
Don't put anything.
Right, because it's for Head Start, Early Head Start only, right? When you get to one that says all programs, then you say, oh, all programs, then that must be me too, right? And as Tasha explained, maybe it's not everything in that box. The help, maybe you're required to have physicals, but you're not required to have a mental health consultant on staff, right? So if you're not required to have a mental health consultant on staff, we're not going to hold you accountable for having a mental health consultant on staff. But we are going to hold you accountable for having a system to collect physicals, right? So if that needs to be strengthened, great. We can take this information and we can say, let's work together to strengthen the system that allows you to collect this information that at the end of the day is going to help you better serve children and families in the city, in your service population. Sorry.
Yeah, so with the questions that may have more than one answer, do you put like one, I always have, we always collect, do physicals, but we almost never have the mental health consultant. How would you have
So because you're not required to do mental health consultant, just cross it out. We almost always collect physicals, that's it. Just use the part that applies to you.
This question may have already been asked, but if we are, we're connected to El Valor for our Head Start program. So, and then we also have PI and PFA. So do we do this strictly for the PI and PFA, or El Valor handles it?
No, you just do your PFA, PI piece.
Thank you.
Yes. You do your PFA, PI piece, and also if you are a PFI, PI agency, and you have a relationship with a delegate. You have a relationship with a delegate, whether it's your delegate is El Valor, or Chicago Commons, or Henry Booth House, or CYC, or whomever. We're asking you to also complete the last page of the tool. It specifically is addressing your partnership relationship. We're trying to gather information about that relationship so we can create some better guidance. It doesn't apply to certain people. If you, like the Archdiocese, they're not Head Start, Early Head Start. Some other ones are. So, okay. It's just plain old, it's just all you do.
Okay, I think the answer is, so we have 6 or 5 of them. So all the centers except one are the Head Start, PFA, and PI, and then we have one that's just PI.
Only do PFA, PI. Only do all programs. Do not do the Head Start, Early Head Start section.
Okay.
Your delegate agency is doing that section.
Okay.
Only do the all programs.
Okay, thank you.
So I just had a quick question for the narrative piece. So we have, Head Start, Early Head Start, PI. When we are writing what the strengths are and the improvements, do we need to specify or just make it general to say this is what the agency, had concerns, and do we need to say, well, this is what we had in our PI program, this is what we had in our...
No, talk about system.
Got it.
Thank you. Joanna, sorry.
I was just going to say, so for ETAs, we're looking for data sources that speak to it. So some of the data sources might just be like HR gives me a report, how many positions there are.
Yeah.
But some of them we might not actually have anything that's really a data source. Do they
Yeah.
have to be interviews?
Yes. Interviews is data, qualitative data, right? That's why you get that team together. You get that team together and you start talking about how you're doing, right? And you start gathering information. So sometimes Michael calls that self-report, That's the technical term for that. All right.
So at the end of the PowerPoint, we have links embedded so that you can reference your sales manual and look at the focus area 2 monitoring protocol that will be monitored against later on this year sometime, and then the Head Start program. The next slide has our information on there. My information, Bernice Vargas, we work on the self-assessment. Please feel free to call, use my email to ask any questions that you may have.
When is this due?
This is due April 16th.
Was this group livelier with more questions, or was it the same as the past 2 days?
You guys are much more lively. Because it's new. It's new. And that's understandable. It's new. It's new. And I mean, it's, I know that you had to do a self-assessment. I'm not sure if everybody did a self-assessment. You were supposed to be doing a self-assessment.
So we had a different tool. We had something called quality improvement.
Well, you can still use that quality improvement tool. All you need to do is also fill out our summary tool. That's the thing, right? Your self-assessment, you need some way to gather information. What are you looking for, right? And then this is all this is summarizing. Yes?
What is the community assessment?
The community assessment is not required of PFA, PI agencies.
We have to go first.
That's due on February 23rd. If you are a delegate agency.
And how is it submitted?
We'll get that. Do we want to? I want to keep moving forward because actually this is going longer. But if you need to get up and use the facility. So you submit your self-assessment. We work it out. If you have questions when you're working on it, if you have any concerns, like I said, Tasha is available, Bernice is available, I'm available, the whole team is available, and we will try to work with you and help you through the process, right? It's not like, I don't want to say it's low stakes, but it's not high stakes either, right? It's supposed to be helpful. We want it to be helpful for everyone. We're not going to send it back with red pen all over it, going, this was not done correctly. All right. So that after you submit a self-assessment, right, and so your monitoring team will be looking at it and the like. That's when we set up these round tables. That's going to happen for PFA, PI programs in the early summer, probably. I'll have some dates later. Go back. And that's when we do this discussion about what the monitors are seeing about your program and what you're seeing in your program. That's when that conversation happens.
There were dates that were listed in that activity calendar. It was like May 20th through June 2nd. Is that true? Or is that subject to change?
Everything is subject to change. Well, you can buy a plane ticket because we'll reschedule if you're out of town. Okay. I think it's early summer for PFA. So here's what happens in this round table, what we discussed. Are you following the standards? What help do you need? Are you meeting your community need? How well are your practices aligning with your goals and objectives? Or what's going to happen in this one is you're going to establish some goals and objectives. The agency, you're going to bring your self-assessment, you're going to bring some of your internal reports. If you have a grant application, you'll bring in maybe your last grant application on that one. There'll be more information coming out from the operations unit about this. And we're going to have the same information. Monitoring reports, data reports. We're going to have a copy of your self-assessment. They'll have looked at it. Next slide. And so then there'll be this conversation about your strengths and your challenges, setting program priorities for the coming year, figuring out what supports you need to achieve those priorities. How can the quality unit come out and help you? And again, I'm returning to this visual representation, right? The action plan is going to come out of the agreed upon action plan is going to come out of this co-assessment monitoring roundtable. Goals and objectives will come out of it eventually too. This is what the action plan looks like. This is our standard form for the action plan that you'll get at the time, right? So at this action plan, we're going to send out the action plan to everybody. They'll bring a draft action plan to your roundtable based on your self-assessment, right? Because it makes recommendations about what you should do. And you'll work with your monitoring team to craft a final action plan together, right? For the coming year. If you're Head Start, Early Head Start, you will have submitted it with your fiscal year 19 grant application. If you're PFA PI, the final approved action plan will be submitted. We're not sure of the due date yet, so not until this summer, because it won't be until you've had a roundtable, right? And you're going to submit it to what's cells-planning@cityofchicago.org. Okay? Okay? Okay. All right, Madeline.
Okay.
Enjoy.
All right. Goals and objectives. So there was quite a bit of talk of goals and objectives, and I just want to back up for a second. I want you to think of this as kind of just a workshop. Nothing's due tomorrow. This is just something you can take away for when you do attend your roundtables in the early summer, and you need to start constructing some program goals and objectives. For those of you that have Early Head Start Child Care Partnership, then you'll be providing a progress update on your goals and objectives in the upcoming application. Head Start, that's a little bit down the road, but that's also just kind of a progress update. So it really typically depends on where you are in your grant cycle as to what you're doing for your goals and objectives, right? So somebody over here mentioned baseline. So if you're in the beginning of a brand new grant cycle, like the way PFA and PI are now with DFSS, you'll be establishing baseline program goals and objectives. And then throughout your grant cycle, which will determine how long that is eventually, what you're doing is you're kind of setting these longer term targets, and then throughout the grant cycle, kind of on an ongoing basis, you're monitoring how well you're doing, you're tracking your progress toward your program goals and objectives, you're doing your self-assessment on an annual basis that's giving you information on your goals and objectives. For Head Start and Early Head Start, you're conducting your updates to your community assessment. For PFA-PI, you're relying on your knowledge of your community area. If something's changed drastically in your community, you're maybe realigning your program goals to address those things. And then typically, the grant application really serves as your mechanism for communicating your goals and objectives and your progress on your goals and objectives to your funder. But again, for this year, PFA-PI, that'll be, the goals and objectives are baseline, and they'll be established during that roundtable process. Okay, so when we talk about program goals, they're a little bit more involved than just the goal itself. So this is an attempt to depict kind of the full, what I call the anatomy of a program goal. And what I'll do for the remainder of this section is break each one of these components down and sprinkle some examples in between so you can kind of get a sense of what they are in example terms. But basically this is kind of how it should flow. So you have your longer term program goal. For Head Start programs, that's a 5-year cycle. Typically your program goals are going to span that grant cycle, but just the major takeaway there is your program goal is broader and it's longer term. And then you break out your program goal into shorter term objectives, which may have even smaller action steps to address those objectives. And then throughout the process, you want to consider how you're going to track your progress? Are you going to use data points or other items to know how well you're doing toward your objectives? And then through establishing a program goal and objectives, you want to make sure you have a good sense of what your expected outcomes might be. These are basically what you want to achieve. And then when it's all said and done and your grant cycle is wrapped up and you've more or less stayed on track with your program goals, there should be some kind of broader impact on the community that you can measure and say, okay, we started here and we got the community, this benefit or whatever. But we'll go into these in greater detail. Okay, so program goal. Again, this is your longer term, broader target for what you want your program to do. It's really the driving force of your program. So let's see. So for our purposes, we want program goals that support our mission to serve children, families, and the community through our early learning program. So these program goals kind of are again broad and span across the program. They're not really specific items. So they can deal with parent, family, and community engagement, various services that you provide, school readiness. School readiness goals are actually a subset of program goals. I have a slide on that to make that clear. Or program goals can be specific groups that you want to target that you feel you're not doing well enough to engage. Things like that. Okay, so where do program goals come from? Well, they can come from all kinds of different places. As Mike went through the community assessment. Even if you don't do a formal community assessment, but you dig in to the CMAT and you find some data on your community, you discover some things that you might want to address. There's some deficit in the community that you think you can help fill. Maybe that becomes a program goal. Maybe there's something you discover after conducting your self-assessment about your program that you want to improve. Or similarly, maybe something comes out in your conversations with your program monitors at the round table, and there's something in your action plan that you want to really tie to a larger program goal. Maybe performance standards or the regulations that guide the funding source of your program have changed, and you have to kind of realign your program to come into compliance with that. Maybe that's a big undertaking and you want to make it a program goal. Maybe at your agency level, your agency leadership is conducting a new strategic planning process, and they're realigning their kind of agency organization-wide goals, and you want to align your program goals so that they're aligned with your agency's larger goals. DFSS just did that recently. Maybe there are some new evidence-based practices that have come out, and you want to make it a program goal to incorporate those into your program. Does anyone have other ideas? Okay, we've established that I just put this here so I can ask you questions. Okay. All right. So, when you're writing your program goals, this is just an acronym to kind of guide you. So basically, you want your program goals to be broad. So they are broad. They're higher level. They're longer term. But then also they break down according to this acronym. So bold. You want your program goal to kind of embrace a little bit of that think big philosophy without being too unrealistic, beyond current expectations. So you want to go a little bit beyond just maintaining compliance. You want to move your program forward, evolve things if you can. You want your program goals to be responsive to the future. So try to set your sights on something that will change things, will create a positive impact in your community in the future as a result of completing your goal. You want your program goals to be responsive to data. This is really important because as we go through and we break down this program goal into smaller chunks, throughout you want to be sure that you're able to track whatever it is you're doing so that at the end of the day you'll know whether or not you met your goal. You know what it'll look like when you've achieved what you've set out to do. So data is a really important component because it helps, different data helps you kind of gauge where you are in the process if you have something you can reference, a data point. It's key to include the thoughts, feelings, voices of your parents, families, and your community as you're planning your goals. You want them to resonate with your target population. And then research, try to stay up with the best practices. Organization-wide, so you want your program goals to align with what you're doing as an agency, basically. Your program goals should be aspirational, not again, so crazy that you can't do it, but try to strive to achieve something that you're not currently doing or doing well enough. I think that's where that aspirational point comes in. And then program goals should be dynamic. So there shouldn't be, just one narrow slice of your program that you're targeting to change. Your program goal should really kind of support the entire program and link in with other program goals. Lift up your school readiness goals. Everything should kind of fit nicely together and have multiple impacts if possible. Okay, so more on writing program goals. Some important things to ask yourself as you're doing this. What is your data telling you? Again, data is so important. It helps you not only figure out what your goal might be, but it helps you track your progress. Again, what does your community need? Think through that. How are the people, the stakeholders, those parents in your community, other community stakeholders that are involved in your program, as well as your internal stakeholders. So if you're a Head Start agency, you have a parent committee, you have a board. Every agency has a board, and then your staff. How are these goals going to resonate? Are they doable? Are they gonna make the community proud? Again, always consider how you might track, monitor, and evaluate your progress. And in doing so, consider what data you currently have. As I'm actually pretty new to early learning, but I'm finding out that there is just tons of data. So you definitely have something to work with. But if you don't, you might consider, well, is this something we can sneak into an intake form or something like that? If you need to collect new data, think about that. Is that going to be too difficult to do? Maybe you should focus on another priority area or program goal if you won't be able to track the one that you're thinking about. So when you finally, you've thought through what you want your program to aim toward, you considered, other things like how you're actually going to accomplish your goal. Is it doable? Will people like it? Can I track it? You have to then sit down and put it on paper. So this is really simplistic, but it's a great place to start. So just think of it as something that your program will achieve. This program will. This program will improve rates of reading together at home. This program will attain full enrollment. This program will, I don't remember my third example, but fill in the blank. You get the picture. So 3 to 5 goals is what we've seen a lot commonly, but again, it's really dependent on the needs of your program. Again, you want those goals to kind of complement each other. And it's important to find this balance between, again, moving your program forward and being realistic about it. Okay, so here's my quick little note on program goals and school readiness types of goals are part of the Head Start grant application, so, but I'm sure that other folks are very familiar with school readiness goals. But for our purposes here, program goals are broader, so they cut across the program, whereas school readiness goals really focus on those child development and early learning outcomes. And I mentioned this before, there are program goals, and then school readiness goals are a subset of those program goals. But really, your program goals should support the achievement of these school readiness goals. And then again, program goals can be focused on a variety of aspects of your program on the broader level. And school readiness goals are really targeted at how well children are doing. So just to kind of sum that up again, the program goal kind of reads as this program will, whereas school readiness goals read as children will achieve this or accomplish this. Does that make sense? Okay, so now we'll get into our example. This is actually a real goal. It was one of the CSD, one of their action plan goals from 2017. So it reads, this program will implement activities, policies and procedures, and systems innovations that result in full enrollment. So what do you, sorry, that's okay. Do you think this goal kind of falls within that broad acronym? Maybe not the boldest thing in the world, but it's, it addresses what the program is meant to do. It's fairly broad, in that it, relates kind of across the program. And it does have some things that seem achievable in there. But then of course, we would then break our goal down into shorter term objectives. So again, that program goal is longer term, and then in order to reach that goal, you need to break it out into smaller implementation steps. So these are your objectives. And in Head Start, it generally is like a 1-year target. So we'll work through what the timeframes are exactly for PFA and PI, but just know that there's your longer term goal, and then shorter term objectives are more achievable and specific. So again, there are statements that describe the results that you're going for and the manner they'll be achieved. And again, always consider how you'll track the progress toward meeting your objectives. And generally, you'll need a bunch of objectives to address your longer term goal. So everyone probably is familiar with this acronym, right? Yeah, it's well loved. And it's great for objectives because as these are your implementation steps, your objectives should be more specific. You should be able to really specifically measure. There should be something that you can actually achieve within the time frame, realistic, and then you should kind of outright state, when do you expect to complete this? Okay, so this is the little poll phase of the workshop. So here are some example objectives. Actually, these are real. So again, flowing out of our program goal of full enrollment, our objectives in order to achieve that goal are to implement a robust recruitment campaign, implement an updated online application system, and to track enrollment on a regular basis. So, what do you think? Does it meet the SMART test specific? I think those are specific steps. What about measurable? Yeah. Achievable or attainable? Yeah, those are doable. So realistic, pretty realistic, and they make sense for the goal. What about time sensitive? I mean, theoretically, but maybe not from the information we have here. Are they time sensitive, right? So does anyone want to take a stab at reworking one of these really quickly?
Well, implement robust recruitment campaign by X date.
Great, great, yeah. Are there any, does anyone else have an improvement for any of these? Yeah.
Maybe what a define what a robust.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. Anybody else? Okay, all right, great. So, what do we think about these? So here we've added some more descriptors, so they're a little bit more specific, and we've added the time frames to achieve. So these are a little bit more. They provide a bit more information about the objective, right? Okay. All right, but don't stop there. You can always break it out into action steps too. So again, you have an objective that still could be a year, target, and you've got one sentence kind of stating what you're going to do. So, you're going to have to plan how to get there also. And I like to think of action steps as tasks in order to plan. These are the things where you might sit down in a room with your team and say, okay, in order to meet this objective, we need to do step 1, and it's your job, and it's due by this date. The example I gave the other day for action steps is mailing a letter, right? You don't just mail a letter, you have to get a pen, get paper, think about what you're gonna write, buy a stamp, walk to the mailbox, you get the picture. So, again, back to our example, here are some more even specific action steps that accompany these objectives. So for launching our recruitment campaign, we might establish a team. And then we're going to develop and disseminate brochures. And then we develop a progress report. And again, these I'm sure need way more action steps. So this is not, the full picture. For our online application system objective, we're going to train agencies on how to use it. We're going to set up a way to track the online applications and where they are in the process. And we're going to provide support to parents so that they can actually use it. And then for our tracking enrollment, we're going to monitor weekly COPA reports and establish a system for certifying. Does that make sense? Okay. And, again, I already talked about this, but throughout this process, you're going to be thinking through how you can track your progress toward your objectives and ultimately your goals. This is where you really consider what kind of data you can use. You might use school readiness data, child outcome reports, parent surveys, sign-in sheets to trainings, to so you know how many people attended, pre and post tests. It's important to consider, what benchmarks might look like, what's 25% there, what's 50% there, what's complete. And then if you can, it's ideal to kind of not just count outputs. So, you might say, okay, we're going to do 5 parent trainings this year. We're going to make sure that, and track those and make sure that they actually happened and who showed up. But you might consider developing a little, 4 or 5 questionnaire to test what people knew in the beginning and then what they learned. These kind of qualitative things are important to consider when you're tracking your progress too. So back to the example. Here are some example ways we track. So we have the team roster to know, who is on the team. We track the number of community events we attended and the number of brochures that were distributed. We would have a progress report. And for our online application system, we'd use those training rosters. Maybe we would implement a pre and post kind of situation too for that. And we'd use our online enrollment system to track progress through the system. And then we'd keep maybe a technical assistance log for every time a parent called and we helped them out. And then, of course, we'd use COPA to monitor our enrollment. And then your outcomes. So these are sort of ever-present items. I feel like in my anatomy they could be anywhere, sort of, or all over. Because in many ways, I think you may not even have your goal just yet, but you know what you want the outcome to be. So it's a matter of working backwards and figuring out what you need to do in order to achieve this outcome, right? So it's what you hope to achieve. It's what you want ultimately your objectives and your goals to do. There may be, multiple outcomes. If your program goal is dynamic, it may have these, it may have a number of impacts on parents, on children, on the community as a whole. So, consider what you can do. And then, of course, always consider tracking your progress with the outcomes. So, here's one of our last examples. But here are some outcomes that we expect as a result of our objectives. So, we're launching that public recruitment campaign citywide so that more families have access to early learning and so that our program reaches full enrollment. Once we launch this online application system and we provide technical assistance and training on it, we hope that there is increased effectiveness and efficiency of that system, and we increase the support we provide to parents who are enrolling their children into our programs. And then we're going to implement this new great system for tracking enrollment, and as a result, our enrollment is tracked with greater precision. Does that make sense? All right, and then when you've completed all your goals and it's a few years later, then you can sit back and enjoy your program impact.
That's the end.
This is really the cumulative effect of your program goals over the longer term. And because you've been tracking everything with all of your great data and your, really kind of precise monitoring of your program goal progress, you should have some really great data that you can use to demonstrate how effective your program is and the positive impacts it's had on the community. So I'll show you just a quick little example. And this one's not real. The other examples were kind of real, but this one's not. So, I think when you think about, obviously impact has value on the community and on your program, but in a very, if you really want the utility specifically of impact, this is something you could put in the beginning of your grant application to demonstrate to your funder that you can do this program, you can do it well, here's what you have to show for. So it could be something like this. For the past 3 years, we have maximized access to early learning programming for children and families in our community due to recent recruitment campaigns and implementation of more effective, efficient online enrollment system. We have reached 250 more immigrant families, reached 10, okay, right, not real, aspirational maybe, reached 10% enrollment for children with disabilities, and maintained full overall enrollment. Parents in our community have also experienced a reduction in enrollment processing time from 35 days in 2015 to 10 days. So that kind of like wraps up in a bow what your program goals got you toward. Okay, so on this, don't get too hung up on it, but this is something that we put in the Head Start grant applications so that we, the delegate agencies can list out their goal and then the objectives that they've set out to achieve their goal, and then they bring in action steps. list how they're tracking progress, what outcomes they expect, and any anticipated challenges throughout the process. This is an example of a baseline, so maybe we'll get a table like this. I'm not totally sure. But this is how it would look in the grant application when you're communicating what your program goals are. And then the next slide is just how it looks in a continuation application. So this would be the next year when you're not setting a baseline, but you're tracking your ongoing progress. So it's a little bit different. You kind of just list whether the goal is new or it's continuing. In this case, most of the time it's continuing. Then you list out your goal, the objectives you set out for the year to achieve your goal, any progress you've made or outcomes you've already achieved, any challenges you've experienced, and then if there were any changes, you just kind of summarize what happened, why, what the changes are. And then this is my contact information if you have questions. And then if there are any questions about it. Okay. Thank you.
I think the one thing you can anticipate is that when in the future, sometime over the summer, that baseline goal and objective chart will be something that you'll be using with your manager. But you'll get specific information about it at the time, and also there might be more training on it as well. So I just want to emphasize that, like throughout this process, and I think that you all mentioned it, this is your first time, and we will work together and get everything done and support you. So, here are some due dates and submission information. This is the Head Start page, so let's go to the next page. This is the PFA PI page. So your self-assessment report, just the summary report, right? In my head, I think to myself, well, don't go over 10 pages. It might be even less, right? But I think one of the problems we have giving you guidance for that is that we haven't done a PFA PI self-assessment yet either.
Yeah,
so we don't know what is a good length. So, once you all start submitting what you think is a good length, we can go from there to come up with better guidance for you. So that's due April 16th. It should be submitted to this address, salesplanning@cityofchicago.org. And if you could label it SAR &ST underline and put your agency name and just put the year.
But you're sending this out?
Yeah. I think it's in the instructions as well. So then the monitoring roundtables right now for PFA PI are scheduled for sometime between the end of May and the beginning of June. This might change, and I'll tell you, if this changes, it'll be later. Typically when we do is when we change things, it usually gets pushed later. Isn't that like the case in life, right? You push it later. So right now, this is what we have on the agenda, but like I said, it might be pushed later, and you'll be given adequate time to know what's coming up. You'll have already completed your self-assessment, so that's like the main thing you have to do for it. And then that action plan, goals and objectives are going to come out of that roundtable. And that too, when the time comes, everything will be submitted to this is the email address for all those things. Now, I know that we passed out a clipboard to get addresses for the CSD update. I also wanted to see when we, I think that we have also a planning grants management calendar. Did anybody in the room receive that? Yeah, so that was sent out too. So if you haven't received that, let's make sure that it's going to go in the update today. So an updated version of that grants management calendar, which has the whole planning cycle and all the due dates, is going gonna be in the CSD update that gets sent out today. And so because you've given Mara your email address, you'll be getting it. I think that's the last, is that the last? And here's all of our email addresses. So which one?
Not the Head Start. You didn't do the Head Start one. No.
Sure.
That's the one I need.
So, right, so they'll do the Head Start program monitoring roundtables, and then they'll do the PFA. April 16th is the same. Yes. And then we know the grant application for Head Start is due on the 15th. Yes.
Is there an electronic version of the self-assessment tool?
Yes, that's what's going to be sent out, I think, is a Word document. So you'll be able to manipulate it. And the actual Word document. Okay? Anything else? Call us. You know, if you need an extension, call us. You know, we're here to help. Yes.
Glenn ran away.
Glenn did run away. Darn it. Victor was here too, and he ran away as well. Darn. Your program, your contract here is July 1st to June 30th, correct? It will start very soon, and so actually, I think that might be on that grants management calendar. She's like, it says maybe. Yes. Is it on here?